Okay. So now I want to ask you this question, very serious question. What is you're a big time journalist? This may come in handy for you. What is the wealthiest country in the world?
Well, how do you define wealth? By GDP per capita? By
the greatest amount of capital.
Greatest amount of capital. Mm-hmm. I would say United States.
Nope, not even close. Nope. No.
By per capita, greatest amount of wealth.
No, just the greatest accumulation of capital.
I mean, capital is a pretty vague term too. China?
No. Okay. It's Ireland.
Ireland.
Yes, Ireland. And you know why?
No.
Because their capital is always Dublin. And so if your capital is always Dublin, you're going to be the wealthiest.
I don't want to podcast with you anymore. I don't want it ever. Oh my.
Speaking of science.
I feel physically sick.
Speaking of science.
Die. I don't think I've ever contemplated suicide before. Somebody call a hotline or something.
Speaking of science, do you know the difference? This is a different question. You know the difference? This is not a trick question. This is not a joke. Do you know the difference between science and scientism?
Oh, Scientology? You've been confirmed. I knew they'd get you.
No, not Scientology. Different thing entirely.
Oh, okay.
No, science and scientism. Okay.
Ism is always tacked on whenever somebody wants to make it sort of belief system, to the point where you could be a cult-like follower of this belief system.
Yeah.
Isms can go in a big range. There's a range of them.
Yeah.
What I'd imagine is someone who is a practicing member of scientism, or who is not a scientist, but
right. Well, this is where little Dickie Dawkins crosses the line.
Richard Dawkins.
Yeah, okay. Little Dickie Dawkins. This is where Dawkins and a whole bunch of his other, atheist, communist guys cross the line. Because I was reading an article today refuting Professor Weingart. Professor Weingart's a notorious scientism advocate. And he defines scientism.
He's also an avid wine garder. Right?
Yeah. He and his brother, Bo and Ben. Yeah.
Brother.
And they define scientism as the view that scientific attitudes and methods can enhance all modes of empirical inquiry. I'll repeat that. It's the view that scientific attitudes and methods can enhance all modes of empirical inquiry. Okay?
All modes. Okay.
Right. Now, the only problem with their definition is, nobody debates scientific methods being applied to purely empirical problems and purely empirical pursuits. The problem is when scientists cross over the line and become metaphysicians by saying, okay, that their concept of science is the concept of science, and science can solve metaphysical problems.
Or ethical problems, even worse.
Right. Or religious problems, like little Dickie Dawkins with his God delusion thing. And they don't even realize, and the article I was referring to is written by a philosophy student, by the way, by the name of Aaron Neal. Very, very bright young man. And he says, here in the article, he says, this definition of scientism is misleading because no one is arguing against the use of scientific methods outside of empirical fields. The great Austrian economist Friedrich Hayek, we did a show on Hayek, for example, wrote that scientism involves a mechanical and uncritical application of habits of thought to fields different from those for which they have been formed. So when little Dickie Dawkins, the evolutionary empiricist, the evolutionary biologist, writes a whole book called The God Delusion, he's off the reservation. He's no longer talking as a scientist. Okay?
Well, I mean, I don't really consider evolution to be a real biology, because what I consider it's a theoretical, because I think he's theoretical biology, or theoretical evolutionary studies. The thing about his particular branch is there is no practical application. It is 100%. He's very smart at what he does.
Yeah.
But it's only in a theoretical lane. You can study theoretical physics, but at some point there's stuff you've learned that engineers can take and use.
Yeah.
So I guess with him, in his own mind, what he thinks the only way you can apply it is with, philosophy. That's applied evolutionary biology.
Real scientists will not wander off the reservation. Real scientists only advocate the application of scientific method, of observation, and then inferences and deduction and application, and then you look at the evidence and see if you can make a reliable prediction. Real science is in the business of making reliable predictions.
Not even conclusions.
No, just predictions, just probabilities, likelihood.
Yes.
Okay? Just likelihood. The problem with scientism, of which many people on the dark web are involved in, scientism is the notion that science can solve all human problems, right? Science can solve all human problems.
Right.
As I was reading another article that was published on Michael Shermer's Skeptic podcast, and it talked about how science can, if we study previous nations that fell into confusion and disorder, like us under Trump, then we can observe patterns. We can see scientific patterns emerge, and then we can make reliable predictions about.
These people are members of scientism when they just throw in the word science every 5 seconds.
Exactly.
It's so frustrating. You can't have a real substantive dialogue if you're just saying buzzwords.
Right.
And for all those who are interested in science out there, I have so many people I personally know that get really annoyed at these sort of pseudo-scientists. Those are the biggest perpetuators of.
Yeah, they're dangerous people. They're dangerous people because
they use buzzwords and they use big words and they say it authoritatively.
Right.
For example,
Dawkins' book is called The God Delusion. Dawkins is not trained in philosophy. He's certainly not trained in theology. And he's certainly not, he knows nothing about metaphysics, but yet he presumes to tell everybody metaphysically he makes metaphysical claims without even realizing it. For instance, when people ask, why there is evil in the world, or can science, when people ask Dawkins, can science tell us the meaning of life? Dawkins shoots back, well, that's not a real question. Okay. Well, okay. He's making a metaphysical claim. Well, no, he's making a metaphysical claim when because he's setting himself up as knowing what a real scientific question is. He's some sort of an expert.
Well, there's the other thing. The other aspect to it is that science is basically a process. It's not, and the thing about this process is it does not tell you what you should do. It bothers me so much, and it bothers conservatives who get branded as denialists for simply pointing out the fact you can tell me how much carbon dioxide is in the atmosphere all you want till the sky turns green,
which it will.
But that does not necessitate we sign the Paris Accords or we have dysregulation. You see,
in this article, Aaron Neal, he has a section called "Scientism Confuses Method for Metaphysics," and he says this. He says that science discloses the properties of the physical world, whereas metaphysics ventures into beyond the physical and explores the fundamental nature of all that is. Science articulates theoretical truths discovered through quantifiable investigations. Metaphysical statements are concerned with the character of reality. Therefore, suggesting that all truths resemble scientific truths is not a scientific claim. It is a metaphysical claim about the fundamental nature of truth and existence per se. I think it's a brilliant article that this young philosophy student wrote for Quillet.
Good for him.
It's absolutely.
Mr. Neal, right?
Yeah. And when we get, I got to quote the section about Dawkins. A notable example of the scientific shift from method to metaphysics comes from Richard Dawkins, Little Dicky, And Peter Atkins, who, like Dawkins, is a prolific author as well as a fellow at Lincoln College, Oxford University, with his bum all sewed up tight so nobody can penetrate, you see? Yes, of course. During the question and answer period following the discussion about the God delusion, Dawkins was asked whether science provides the answers to the great existential questions of why. In his reply, Dawkins declared that questions like, why does the universe exist, are silly questions, that do not deserve answers. Peter Atkins makes...
He's the grand moral den mother of metaphysics, I guess.
Yeah, exactly.
Good little Dawkins.
Exactly. Science does not say that only scientific questions are worth pursuing. Nor does science say that every aspect of reality can be explained by science. Lurking beneath the rejection on scientific, these who latch on to scientism, they couldn't get out of bed in the morning and go to their laboratory and put on their white coats and look into their microscopes for microbios. Oh, little things.
Richard Dawkins doesn't even look at microscopes. That's not what he does.
Oh, he's looking for God under a microscope.
No,
This guy's so silly.
He literally just sits there and hypothesizes what things turn into if they have enough time. That's what he does all day. And he teaches kids how to do, he just teaches kids how not to believe in God, actually, if we're going to be very...
the writer, this philosophy student, he formulates a beautiful metaphor. He said the relation between the scientisms and the real scientists is like examining the world with a metal detector and concluding that rubber does not exist. Of course, it's beautiful. I mean, if you only are using a Geiger counter to measure the world, of course rubber doesn't exist. No, it doesn't exist. The only things that are real are things that we can detect with a Geiger counter or a metal detector.
We make fun of it now, but it's a serious. I know we're getting close on time. I'll outline this. It is a wrap it up. Yes, as usual. It is a serious problem that we are determining all these things by observing them. And ultimately, if we're dealing with things like what is good, what is right, we're just observing what we feel.
Right. Exactly right.
Because we can't make a conclusion, well, this is a good thing. Yeah. No, we can only say that if we observe it makes us feel good. Right. We cannot observe whether it actually is universally good or not. It's not.
Scientism is a monastery populated by scientists who have anointed themselves as priest and pope. They decide what questions are valid. They decide what we can do. And I really feel sorry for young people, students who are going into classes and they're told that the only things that are real are things that we can see, smell, taste, and touch with a metal detector. Anyway, great chatting with you as always, Alex.
As always.
Talk to you soon, man.
You will.
Exactly. Stop recording.